What is up, guys? Zorskashiot is here with Minuttia, and today we are going to discuss alt texts. Let's get into it. The things we are going to cover throughout this tutorial is what alt texts are, why they are important, some common mistakes that we see when it comes to alt text, some best practices, and things to pay attention to when writing your alt texts for the images on your website. First, we are going to see what alt texts are. According to Moz, alt text, which stands for alternative text, also known as alt attribute or alt description, or technically incorrectly as alt tags, are used within an HTML code to describe the appearance and function of an image on a page. For example, in this chart on our blog, the alt text, as you can see, is Ahrefs organic keywords chart shows how the organic visibility of a website changes in the last 5 years period. Okay. Now let's see why alt texts are important when it comes to content SEO. There are two main reasons why alt texts are important. The first one, which is overlooked by many content SEO professionals, is that alt texts help make the web accessible to people with disabilities. For example, people with little or no vision. The second reason, which is also very important, is that alt texts help search engines understand what an image is all about. In other words, they give context as to what an image that is published on a particular page on your website is all about. Now, let's see some common mistakes when it comes to alt texts. As you can see, the first mistake that we see, and this is something that we see very often, by the way, is to use the target keyword as the image title or alt text when it doesn't make sense to do so. There is nothing wrong with using the target keyword for a page, the keyword that the page is optimized for, as the alt text of an image, but only if it makes sense to do so. If it doesn't make sense to do so, then you should avoid doing it. The second mistake that we see is to use the title of the content piece as the image title or alt text. Once again, if it makes sense to do so, then go for it. But if not, try to avoid adding the title of the content piece as your alt text. Another mistake that we see is to use the same alt text as alt text in every image of the content piece. Quite frankly, this is a bit spammy and it is definitely the wrong approach to do things. The last mistake that we see is to use related keywords as alt text when it doesn't make any sense to do so. As we'll see later, the alt text of an image that exists on a particular page has to be descriptive as to what the image is all about. Thus, if the related keyword that you're using does not describe what the image is all about, then you should avoid doing it. You should avoid adding the related keyword as the alt text for that particular image. Now, we've seen some common mistakes. Let's see some best practices when it comes to alt text for the images that exist on your website. The first and most important best practice when it comes to alt text is to be as descriptive as possible. For example, we have here an example, our first example, with two men having a discussion in front of a whiteboard, one holding an Apple laptop and using a green marker to illustrate his point. As you can see, we've been descriptive as to what the image is all about. So someone, for example, who has little or no vision can understand what the image on that page is all about, but we haven't prolonged it. In other words, we've been brief and right on spot when it comes to describing what this image is all about. The second example that we have is this image over here, where we can see basically a pair of black and white Vans low-top sneakers on top of a chair inside a vibrant and modern apartment room. And since this is what we see basically, this is exactly what we've added as an alt text for this image. Nothing more, nothing less. In our third example, as you can see, now we don't have a photo. So we have to describe that, and we have to say basically that what we see when it comes to this image is an illustration of two children, one girl and one boy, riding a bicycle. But it's important that we say, what is the format of this image, which is an illustration, to basically give context as to what the image is all about. Because obviously this is not a photo, it's an illustration, and thus it's good to include that in our alt text. The second best practice that we have is to use relevant terms when it makes sense. For example, in the following chart on our Ahrefs guide, we should mention Ahrefs in our alt text, since this is basically where the graph comes from. So in this case, it's not spammy or wrong to include Ahrefs inside our alt text, because the source of the graph is Ahrefs. Another best practice, and I'd say that this is rather controversial as whether or not this is a best practice, is to leave the alt text empty. The truth is that if there is nothing to say about an image, if there is nothing that you can say to describe it, so that you give context both to people who may not be able to see the image or to search engines, it's better to leave the alt text empty than writing something that could be misleading about it, or that could not be sufficient in describing the purpose and the context of the image. So leave the alt text empty if there is nothing you can say to describe an image on a page that exists on your website. Now let's get to some things that you need to pay attention to when it comes to alt texts. The first one is to conduct regular website crawls to make sure that all images on your website have an alt text. By conducting regular crawls using a crawler like Screaming Frog or Sidebulb, you're able to basically identify images without an alt text and add an alt text to those images in order to be sure, if it makes sense, of course, as we mentioned previously, but in order to be sure that every image on your website, or at least the images that have some purpose and can be described, are described in the best way possible. The second thing that you need to pay attention to is that you have to be descriptive, but you have to be brief at the same time. You don't want to overdo it. You can't add an alt text like a full 4 or 5 line paragraph. You have to be brief, but at the same time you have to describe the context. You have to give context about the image in the best way possible. Last but not least, we recommend that you make alt text part of your process, which means that no page, content page, feature page, a blog post, anything that includes images gets published without having alt text for all the images included on the page. Thus, by writing an alt text for every image that you publish on your website, and by conducting regular website crawls, for example, monthly, for your website, you will be in the position to identify images without alt text, or not have images that are published without alt text at all. So we'd say that both of them are important, both making alt text part of your publishing process and creation process, and conducting regular website crawls. Both of them are important, and they can both help you ensure that all, or at least the ones that make sense, images on your website have an alt text. And that would be it. Now you know some of the most important things when it comes to alt text for the images on your website. We'd like to hear from you how you write alt text for the images on your website, and what are some of the best practices you are following when you're doing it. Let us know by leaving a brief comment below, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more videos like that. Thanks for watching, and take care.